Hey everyone, I know it's spring, but it's never too early to think about harvest. Geringhoff is head of the class no matter the crop, making premium harvesting heads for all your harvesting needs. Check them out at geringhoff.com.
It is crazy, but we're in an unbelievable position for our customers. We haven't had to tell anybody, hey, if you don't put an order in back in January, we can't guarantee that you're going to get it. If you didn't do business with us last year, we're not going to be able to take care of you this year, which I know with some of the fungicide markets has happened.
Ladies and gentlemen, farmers, ranchers, and distinguished guests, thank you for listening to the Farm for Profit podcast, where we discuss the latest ideas, methods, trends, and techniques available to help your farm achieve higher levels of farm profitability. The Farm for Profit podcast is co-hosted by Tanner Winterhoff, the Iowa Bankerman, and David Whitaker, the Iowa Land Guy, where in tandem they will share their ideas and advice from industry experts. Thank you again for listening to the Farm for Profit podcast. Remember, if you aren't farming for profit, you won't be farming for long. And now, here's Tanner and David.
Hey, listeners, welcome back to the Farm for Profit podcast. This is Tanner Winterhoff.
This is Corey Hillebo.
And this is David Whitaker.
We are here to cover some spring agronomy updates. We have had another spring that's not like any others. I feel like there's never 2 years that are the same, Corey.
At least here, it's pushed back, but we're going to have a grand time doing it.
Yeah, exactly. It gives us the opportunity to do this without feeling bad about not being in the field.
Yep.
But listeners, if you have ideas for topics or guests, farm4profitllc@gmail.com or find us on social media. Again, thank you for telling all your friends and family about us. We can't say that often enough, but our listener review today is brought to you by BW Fusion. Just a reminder of the promotion when you sign up for 500 acres to use their products, such as the 401 Microbial Team or Meltdown. When you mention Farm for Profit, you will get one free field in their BW 365 program. So what is our listener review this week?
It is W. Parkinson. It says, that's a good one. Always enjoy your content. And that was from Twitter. So thank you. Short and sweet and good.
What's
I like
the one?
those.
I wonder what the one was. The good one. Was it just the episode or just we're good?
Oh, I could have looked at the date.
Oh, yeah, Tanner. You dropped the ball there.
Darn outline producer. No, that was me. And also you can leave us a voicemail, 515-207-9640. But back by popular demand, one of our most listened to guests, our favorite agronomist. We can call you an agronomist, right, Bodie?
You can call me whatever you want to.
Bodie Kitchel with BW Fusion. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, guys. I only have one request. If you could maybe take some rain so that I didn't have to deal with so much so we could start planting, it would be mighty kind.
Well, we're the same way here in central Iowa, so we'll just keep on passing it over to Nebraska, who is complaining about not having rain.
We got to get it shipped south. Of course, now there's flood warnings all the way up and down these rivers because we're shipping it down to the Gulf, but we don't need any more here for a little while.
Yeah. We literally went from too dry, which I would have argued that we were just fine, but to gully washers and out of we were set up ready to go there at the end of April, and nope, can't plant for 3 weeks.
Yeah, just sit here and watch.
Yep. Hopefully by the time this comes out, we'll be rolling hard.
That's right. That's the plan. So we're going to pick your brain, Bodie. We did a fall agronomy episode. You helped us out a lot on fertilizer placements, different types of nitrogen. We had a really good conversation around that. But it seemed like as soon as we aired that, all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. Yeah. And fertilizer prices skyrocketed. All our inputs started to take off. Of course, the markets ran wild. And now we are either in the process of or just about to start putting one of the most valuable crops that some of our listeners have ever raised into the ground. So
yeah, it has certainly been a wild, really, I would say 365 days, but really 2 years. Really since COVID started, it's been a very, very, very wild landscape or ride in the ag markets.
So what are you seeing around your territory? I know, you're wet where you're at. We're wet where we're at. It's been dry other places. But is there anyone getting anything done? Are you shipping product anywhere that's going in the ground?
Yeah, we are. So depending on where you go, everybody's got their challenges. And I've said this for years, everybody has their challenges. We sometimes feel like it's isolated to just us, and we get to feel a little bad for ourselves. And, we didn't get planted in the window that we typically would like to, but I've got some customers down in Oklahoma with multiple acres that is getting zeroed out due to drought. And but then you go into Mississippi and they've got corn that's at V8 right now.
So you're saying they're already at V8 stage?
Yeah, he's got. I actually got some photos from one of our reps down there and some videos. Started to see some problem areas within fields starting to pop up. Don't know whether it's a high pH or a low pH spot, whether it's a nematode issue, but certainly can see something. And then 3 rows over, you've got really good looking corn, and it's V8. I mean, really good looking corn that would be in that Mississippi area. They're putting their second shot of side dress on actually when I got the video.
I know you got some beans that are coming up and looking pretty good too, because Bodie, your colleague, was sending me pictures of that like right after a heavy rainstorm. I'm like, what do you want me to do with this? Makes me feel bad that we haven't planted anything yet. I think he was trying to show me a product. Looked like some good roots on some beans, but there got to be some good beans out there too, right?
Yeah, so the young kid that I've worked with out of North Carolina for the last couple of years, they were able to get in. They were a little later maybe than typical, but they got a good looking corn crop going right now. Got some beans that are really V1, just kind of starting on V1 that look pretty good.
So
Nice.
as a advisor and an agronomist, what for all these people that are chomping at the bit to get in the field, it's wet, what advice do you have for them?
Man, I almost feel like that this is going to be a conversation that I have with my dad and my grandpa in years past. I think the biggest thing to note is oftentimes we want to go by the calendar, but as it gets late and especially moisture, we really have to go when the soils are fit. You guys said it at the open. No 2 years are the same. If we get moisture and we stay relatively wet after a wet planting season, you may not see the really terrible effects of what planting wet does. But if we plant wet and we turn off hot and dry, which our weather here, we're supposed to be 2 weeks getting into the 90s. So we've gone the last 2.5, 3 weeks of wet, and 55 is a hot day over this last 2 weeks, to now we're going to go to into the 90s and dry for 2 weeks. And I know the calendar tells you we've got to go, we've got to get a lot of acres in the ground in a hurry. But the biggest thing I would say is make sure your soils are fit, because you're not going to get a root system to develop properly if we go from fairly wet, saturated soils, planting maybe a day or two early, maybe working ground a day or two early, and then we go hot and dry. You're going to have roots that just, they look terrible. And if we go dry through the summertime, it's the quickest way to take a pretty decent crop, even though we're going to plant relatively later, and make it subpar at best.
We're here at our field day.
We've had a great number of farmers out here. It's been an awful lot of fun. We've been demoing many different machines from the Salford Independent Series and a couple of other ones.
We did test strips. We put signs up. We let the guys walk through it, kick the soil, dig in it, see what they liked. And then we also did live demos where the guys drove by in some side-by-sides, and also a couple guys jumped in the cabs and watched them work from the cab.
Salford's unique. We make several traditional pieces of tillage equipment, cultivators, plows, that sort of thing. In the early 2000s, they started making what has evolved into the Independent Series, which is a set of vertical tillage tools that come in a variety of aggressive levels and perform a different variety of tasks. They're at different spacings, designed for spring work, fall work, and it seems everyone that buys one finds new things that it can do.
It's different. It's something that our main manufacturers aren't carrying. We do make an independent vertical tillage. A lot of the other ones on the line that make vertical tillage don't have the style we have, so that stands out to a lot of guys. Make sure you do your research. Come to a field day. We like to do them. We have fun. We also do have demo units, so get a hold of your local sales guy and maybe we can get a demo out to your farm.
Demo days are a great way to see the vast tillage machinery lineups that Salford has to offer in action. Now is the season to get out to a local field day or book a Salford tillage demo for yourself. Head over to salfordgroup.com/farm4profit to contact a local dealer to see what is available near you. Also, Salford has a bonus for Farm for Profit listeners only. They're giving away a custom Orion cooler prize package. So go to that salfordgroup.com/farm4profit and enter to win this cool cooler package. The timing is perfect as the temperatures are heating up to keep those drinks of yours cool while you're in the field. That site again is salfordgroup.com/farm4profit. Also, as a bonus, if you follow them on any of their social media platforms using the handle @SalfordGroup, you will get bonus entries. Good luck.
So I had read an article, I think it was a representative of a seed company that stated before May 15th, you really don't see any yield loss potential on corn. Between May 15th and May 20th, they're talking Iowa and Illinois, you lose about 5% of potential out of the bag. And then after May 20th, it's about a third of a percent every day, so on and so forth. Is there any rhyme or reason to that? Or is the potential in the bag still there, even though we're getting planted later?
Yeah, so I think we have to first define potential, right? Because that potential is very different to a lot of people. A guy like David Hula, potential 616 bushels. You know, guys in the Midwest, you know, potential might be 250, 270, 280, right? So are we talking 5% off of 600? Or are we talking 5% off of 250? Because those numbers are really different. And do we have a chance to see a reduction in yield? The answer is yeah. But a lot of times it's because what happens is we're going to end up planting corn really in what I would call optimal conditions, right? If you look at what the next 2 weeks looks like from a forecast, we've got really good soil moisture and we've got a lot of heat units coming. And you planting that, you're going to go from V1 to V5, V6 in a matter of days. You're not going to talk about it in a matter of weeks. If we plant in April, you know, yeah, sure. Now that same exact growth stage time is going to take you a matter of some weeks. And what happens is, and the best way, there's a guy that I work with in Tennessee, and we use analogies an awful lot back and forth, but Ethan Tanner says it best. It's like a train that you can't slow down. You know, it's picked up all speed and it's got one speed and you can't slow it down. And that's what typically happens when we plant later. You know, your plants become more auxin dominant, which means that it's going to be more vegetative in growth. And it comes out of the ground and it grows so fast, advances through a lot of its growth stages really quickly. And if we get a somewhat cool, you know, late July, August, I would say that 5% or 10% yield reduction we don't see. But if we stay fairly warm or hot and you know, decent moisture, that's where I think you could see that reduction is because we don't have the chance to accumulate enough of that fertility, enough energy inside of that plant that we really advance it way too fast through vegetation, and then we keep going too quickly through our reproduction. And, you know, Corey, this would be very familiar with you, right? Is the faster we go through grain fill, that's typically not a year that our high yields come from. Yep. If we can get through vegetative, you know, pretty decently, but kind of slow down through grain fill, that's where a lot of our top end yields will come from. And this year just kind of seems like it's going to be that one that we're probably going to have to work a little bit harder to try to sit down or to slow down that crop a little bit through vegetative, just looking at how this weather has kind of progressed thus far.
Do you know how to do that, Corey? Do you know how to slow a crop down?
I don't. Maybe don't shorten up your maturity. Would that be one?
I'm curious.
Stick with your regular maturities.
If we want to try and slow it down, how can we do that?
Cover crops?
You know, fungicides will slow a crop down. There's certain, you know, if you're not big into fungicides, you know, there's other that's going to be more like, okay, so like cytokine dominant versus auxin dominant, right? So seaweed, kelps, those things are getting really popular right now. That will kind of help. And what I talk about, sit on it or slow it down, it's basically just telling that plant to relax. It's trying to take that stress off of that plant and allow it to just go through some normal growth and development. Whereas, if we don't spray some of those products, or, we don't spray a fungicide or a kelp or something along that lines, the weather that looks like it's coming, that plant is going to mature really quickly, because the GDUs, it's still going to get them. It's just going to get them in a much smaller window. So everything is magnified. Everything happens significantly faster. As far as your comment, Corey, I've spent a lot of time in the seed business before coming over here. I certainly am one that I'm going to stick fairly true to my maturity ranges, at least until that May 2025 area. I'm not ready to pull the panic alarm yet. And the reason for that is one, we started off this show and you guys talked about guys planting their most valuable crop, right? It's the most valuable, it's the most expensive crop. And you picked that 112 or 113 day RM corn to start with for a reason. And the reason that you picked it back in the fall time was probably because you liked the agronomic package on it and you liked the yield potential that it gave. I would say there's nothing that has changed between then and now that you would want to just pull the alarm and say, well, I've got to go to 104 day or I got to go to 105 day, because we do know that we're going to give up some yield when we go from that 112 into that 103, 104, 105.
Yep.
One of our listeners, did you have a question?
I was just going to also throw in there, there's a fine balance, right? Especially when you get this far north and probably north of us, that you don't want those GDUs too fast, but you do want GDUs to finish, because when they're talking finish the crop, they're talking physiological maturity, $3 LP and $6+ natural gas. We're going to be looking at a really high drying bill on a lot of bushels if we have to, but if it's a lot of bushels, that's fine, right?
Yeah, we certainly don't want a repeat of 2009. I don't know, Corey, if you were farming with your family in 09 or whether you were in school or what, but 09 was a brutal year. That was my first year in the seed business. And that was a year that for us, at least in Indiana, it was Halloween and we were still shelling 30% corn. Yep. We didn't get the GDUs late. We had a lot of disease coming in. Elevators were only accepting wet corn until noon. The rest of the day they were working on getting caught up and drying. So there, like everything, there is a fine balance to this. Yes.
Yeah. 2009 was bad here as well. I got buddies up in northern Iowa that they got early frost and didn't get to physiological maturity. So it was just a bunch of mold, bad stuff. Then there were some guys up around Highway 20 that had waxy corn, and it doesn't dry down that well anyway. And they were running it through the dryer twice.
Whoa.
So, yeah, not good.
So we had a listener that wrote in saying, clearly this is a high-stake crop growing season. What is available, one, to help jumpstart my crop? Sounds like we might not even need to, based upon the forecast here in the Midwest. And two, what can I start planning to do to mitigate the stress that this crop might go under?
Yeah, those are both really good questions. You think about, I go back to Twitter, it's the social platform that I'm the most active on or pay attention to. And you get some of the naysayers out there and they'll talk about, where's the guys with the, that are selling the row starters, right? They post the pictures early on and you see these really big differences, treated versus untreated. And they always ask, well, where are those people at late season? And I think you have to answer that question by first evaluating, where we're at as far as the weather conditions that we've had, because that question, how do I get my crop off to a really good start, could be answered in a multitude of ways. Like, one, are we talking about, putting a better root system on it? Are we talking about trying to load up some fertility early? Or are we truly trying to figure out how to get even uniform emergence out of that ground early? And to your point, I would say that if you're just looking for the emergence piece, it's probably one that's not going to be, the top of the list this year. If you haven't planted yet, if you've already planted, I would say that probably is extremely important. You probably are hoping that you had a pretty decent starter package, in-furrow package, biological something. to help that plant get through the weather that it had if you planted early. But if you hadn't gotten the plant until later, that piece isn't as critical. And then the other question, you have to repeat that because I forgot what the other question is.
What can we start doing to think about ways to keep the stress, to reduce the stress off?
There's a lot of ways to do that, right? For years, a V5 fungicide has been fairly popular with a lot of people. They put it in with a herbicide trip. That happened back in 2012. It seemed like that got really big. There's other products. We carry a product called Respite, which is an ethylene inhibitor. And basically what that is doing, what you're doing by trying to slow down ethylene is ethylene is a gaseous hormone that actually causes that plant to start its senescence process. So we want ethylene later in the year so that plant starts to mature, especially if we struggle like a 2009 type year. So you wouldn't want to spray Respite late season if that's the year that we're having. But if we get hot, dry, if you're spraying herbicides, anything that we do that plant has to expand energy to metabolize, right? It's got to metabolize chemistry. If we're cool, if we're wet, any abiotic or biotic stress event. So that biotic stress event would happen anything that's biologically related. Abiotic stress is anything that would be something weather related, right? Too hot, too cold, spraying a herbicide. Those are all stress events that happen in our plant's life cycle that they actually have to expand energy to process that and to get through it. And when you think about, 96.6 and 3.4, right? 96.6% of our total yield is coming from carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. 3.4% actually comes from fertility. That energy piece, that sugars, those starches, we don't want the plant to have to burn those up, especially early in the growing season, because that's what really is going to give us that big top end yield. So, products like maybe it is a V5 fungicide for us. We look at our biological products. They actually produce ACC deaminase, which is a precursor to ethylene. So you can go a more biological route trying to prevent the ethylene. You can use Respite as one of those things. So those are just a couple examples. You could use the seaweed, the kelp that we talked about. Those would be a few examples of how you can kind of keep the stress off of those plants.
I'm ready to go. I'm ready to run through a brick wall. It's late and we can still yield. There's still potential out there.
Well, I agree. I looked at the forecast here, and obviously I've heard a lot of meteorologists starting to put their long range together, saying that I think I saw 65% we could currently have a La Nina summer, if I'm remembering in the notes correctly, that it might be hot and dry here in the Midwest. So that probably, like you were saying early on in the show, is an incentive to make sure we get planted in the right conditions, but then take care of that crop. As a banker, I see the significant amount of inputs, increase in costs that have gone into this crop. Not a lot of guys book stuff early. I get it. But we look at the prices that we have available now to where, I don't think nerves is the right word, but I think a lot of our listeners are anxious to make sure that they do everything right. But then the calendar always seems to get in the way of their mind as well. Would you say that's accurate? Are you wrestling in your head?
It's like peer pressure. I mean, right? Like, because there's a lot of the bigger guys that have to get over the acres that were pushing the envelope before it was ready or fit. But it's nerves a little bit. I mean, it's emotion, right?
Right.
Last year we were done by now.
Right. Another question that we got. Go ahead.
If you're done by now, so it doesn't take very long. So if you're normally done by now, we can, as farmers, as agriculture, plant faster, quicker, better, stronger, and get it done. So even though we're later than normal, then we should be able to get it all in because we have the ability and technology to go quicker, better, faster.
A guy on Twitter asked, how many days would you need if you had perfect days to get your whole crop in? It's based on your size of equipment and how big your farm is and all that. And I kind of figured it up. And if I had perfect days, and granted we have livestock, so there's no perfect day, it doesn't seem like, but it would be like 10 days for us. And we don't have a high-speed planter. If we did that, you could cut that by down to maybe 6.
Really?
Yeah, my in-laws, we did. I saw that same question, and I asked them, and it would take 8 days for my in-laws, and I think my dad could be done in 5. Perfect days. You don't stop and go.
Yeah, on our farm, we could plant our beans in 2.5 days. We could probably plant our corn in 3.5 days, and that's without really feeling like you're just drop dead tired at the end of that. I have a customer that I work with, maybe farms 3,500 acres, and he goes, if we work 24-hour shifts, she said we've done before. He said, with what we have 100 feet worth of planters. He said we could plant our entire crop in 3 days in 24-hour cycles where they rotate it out. I'm not sure I'm built for that, but one thing that I understand about the ag industry is if that's the window that we get to put the crop out, we'll all do it, right? We'll all do it, and we'll be tired. But the one thing I've said is we typically do. We've been very fortunate that we do seem to always get a window. Maybe not the best window, maybe not the window that we would like, but we typically get a window to get our crop in.
Tanner, we better release more podcasts for the 3-day window. We just need to know what that window is.
That's not a bad idea.
we got 72 hours.
It's dropping every 2 hours.
To podcasts. Yes. We're just going to go live for 72 hours straight.
If you're up, we're up.
There you go.
I don't think so. Great idea, but I don't think so. We had another question come in that asked, because of how high the stakes are, this is our terminology, not theirs, is this still the right time to try something new? Is this still a year to take the time to put in check strips or test plots or try and set up some variability on practices on our farm? Or is it just too late? The window's too small? Just go.
Yeah, there's no such thing as the perfect year to test anything. I think if you're genuinely curious or you want to learn, I think every year is the year to test. Does this mean that you're gonna whatever the data suggests that one year you're going to implement something so massive across your entire farm? I don't know. Everybody has a risk tolerance difference. Some people are going to say, hey, this year, last year, Corey said he's done by this time, right? This year he's going to be planting in mid to late May. So what he sees today out of a test strip, is that something that he's going to replicate? And I think the question really becomes, how are you defining success of what you're testing? If it's truly yield, then I think you have to be able to step back and say, okay, this year was very different than other years that I've had. Did I use a stress mitigation product this year that I haven't ever used before? And we were hot and dry for 3 weeks and we were 90 degrees. Well, does that mean that you're going to implement it? If it's a few bucks an acre, the answer is probably so, right? If it's in that $8 to $10 an acre range, the answer is maybe I'm more inclined to try it on more acres. But then the flip side of that I would say is if you're looking at something and you're defining success, and let's just talk about the biological space for a second, right? If you are looking at from a reduction of inputs and you're measuring it with soils, with tissues, not just yield, that's where I think that adoption process gets sped up a little bit, right? Because you have something that is of value that you can associate a dollar figure to it, regardless of yield, and more regardless on what that weather pattern is. If I'm putting biologicals in and I'm looking at, my whole goal is how do I get more nutrient efficiency, right? How do I keep or maintain the bushels that I'm producing today with less inputs? If you're using soil and tissue, which I hope that you are, if that's truly what you're trying to accomplish, if you're truly trying to accomplish reducing $1,000 or $1,100 a ton MAP, or trying to reduce or lower, $800, $900 a ton potash, $1,700, $1,800 a ton anhydrous, I hope that you're taking soils and tissues to show what that microbial that you're using is. And if you're taking that kind of data, I think that's something that translates between years and between different years, because it's a reaction, it's something that's going on in the soil that you can measure. Yield is so stinking subjective. From 2000 and, what your yield was in 2017 to 2021, what your yield was from 2019 to 2015. There's no 2 years that are alike. Our challenges are different. Our hybrids keep getting advanced at a faster pace. So if it's just yield, I would say try it, right? Like if you're looking at a product that hey, I want to see if my plants respond to boron, put your test strips out. Because I do think that every year is an opportunity to learn. We only get X amount of years to put a crop out. I look at it from my side of things is we only get so many years to learn something, right? And if I waste a year, or if I don't, maybe waste isn't the right word, but if I don't try to learn something this year, now I'm one more year down the road and I'm another year that I didn't learn anything. And for me, that just bugs the heck out of me.
So you said if you hope they're using soils and tissues together to measure that, what is a good way or good process to do that? Because I know from the past, just taking a tissue sample, you feel good about it, but if you're not doing it correctly, it's not worth very much.
Yeah, it's really not worth more than the paper that it's printed on. If you're only going out and taking one tissue at one random point in the year, I would say that you really don't know anything about what that product's doing. That doesn't matter whether it's mine or whether it's a competitor's. If I was going to do it and I was going to try to make a decision on an operation, I would want treated, untreated areas. I would want at least one. But reality is I'd like to see 2 soil samples. And the minimum for me that I would like to see would be like 4 tissues. I'd want to see early season, if let's just talk about a biological that I apply in furrow. I'd want a V4 tissue, right? And I'd also want something around that call it anywhere from the V8 to V12 time frame. I would want it somewhere in that VT to R2 time frame, and then I would want one in that R4 time frame. And if you're only using tissues, and you're trying to evaluate a product on whether it works, and you're only using tissues, this part is extremely important. Take the biomass samples. If you're not taking biomass samples of a treated versus an untreated, and you're only looking at the tissue values, those tissue tests have a chance to lie to you. And the great thing, and here's what I tell people, if you've never experienced tissue testing before, the great thing is that they have no bias. The bad thing is that they have no bias. When you send a sample into the lab, they don't know what kind of plant that they came off of. They don't know whether it came off of a Muggsy Bogues or whether it came off of a Shaquille O'Neal. And anybody that's a basketball fan is going to get that reference. If you're not, you're not going to get it. But it's somebody that's 5'5" or it's somebody that's 7'2". Somebody that weighs 140 pounds or 50 pounds versus somebody that weighs 320. My point is that biomass would dilute what that sample is. So you could have a treated area of your field that on tissues actually looked inferior to the untreated area until you bring in the biomass. And once you bring in the biomass, if there is a difference, you would then see that the treated area might actually have a significant advantage.
So how do you go about bringing in the biomass?
Yeah, so what I typically do is I try to go about, an inch above the soil surface. And then I just take a knife and I cut it off. And I take a couple of plants, I take anywhere between 8 to 10 plants, treated and an untreated. No cherry picking. You got to have the same method you use on the untreated versus treated or vice versa. And you take the same plants, whether it's you take all 10 plants in a row from both, or whether you just use a random and you say, I'm going to grab the 1st, the 5th, the 10th, the 20th, whatever, so on and so forth. But you just have to do it and be consistent with it. And then you can grind it up and you can weigh it, or you can take a sample, put them all together and weigh them on like a gram scale or weigh them on something that can go fairly low on weight.
So you're literally just sampling the weight, the mass, geez, sound like a podcast host, don't I? The sheer mass of the plant is going to differentiate or provide another factor to go along with your tissue samples.
Yeah. A funny story. You guys, you guys will get this and appreciate this. I've told Bodie this to his face, that sometimes I feel like he's an emotional roller coaster. So one day he'll call me and he's up here, he's on top of the world, and the next day it's like somebody kicked this puppy. And I'll never forget it when I first brought what is now Agronomy 365 to BW. We're doing our tissues at our research farms that he had, and he had these research locations all over. He's one of the most organized, documented people that I know. And I'll never forget, he calls me and he goes, I knew it. I knew this was going to happen. I said, what's happened, bro? He said, I just got our tissue results back and we're less than the untreated. He said, this is ridiculous. There's no way that this could be. I said, Bodie, did you take biomass samples like we talked about? And he said, well, no. And I hung up on him. And he tried to call me back and I said, don't call me back until you have biomass samples. And I hung up on him again. So he gets biomass samples, he calls me back, and I could just tell, like, the tone of his voice was different. And I said, yes. And he goes, never mind, I'm better. And I said, what do you mean you're better? He goes, well, we had a 32% advantage on our biomass. So just the biomass of the treated plant had a 32% advantage versus the untreated. And he's like, I understand what you were talking about now. And it's extremely important to know, because if you've never taken tissues before, or maybe you have taken tissues and you've got them back and you're like, boy, this doesn't make sense because this plant visually, I would really rather take this one. But this plant over here is telling me that it's got a higher nutrient content.
So you're the more mass, the stronger the plant in theory.
Yeah, but could have less nutrients on a percentage basis, because how they do it is they take that sample, they run it through acid digestion, and it basically strips and it gives you a percentage of that nutrient, but it doesn't take biomass into account. So like when I go and I speak, I typically find the smallest person in the room, and I say, you guys see this person over here, and they look at him, right? And I say, I understand that everybody wants a body like mine, right? And I said, if you look at him and then you look at me, you can clearly tell our biomasses are different, right? Now, the little guy could have a 4% nitrogen value if we did a tissue test, and I could have a 3%. But once you factor in biomass, I could have 250 pounds of nitrogen in me, and he could have 175 in him. So I actually have 75 more pounds of that nutrient, but because my biomass is larger, it's diluted down, and so the concentration of that nutrient doesn't report as high.
So there's got to be a way to test that, a weight versus the test results that you have. Is there a formula for that?
So that's a really good question. And the answer is if you're doing whole plant samples, the answer is yes. If you're doing tissue tests, the answer is no. And the reason is because typically what happens is you would take a whole plant sample, right? So you would grab the whole plant treated, the whole plant untreated, but you only take a certain leaf, right? The fully most developed or collared leaf on that plant. So if you have a V5 corn plant, you technically would have 7 leaves exposed, but you would pull the 5th leaf from the bottom, right? Mm-hmm. So you pull that leaf. Well, that is just a reporting of what the nutrient concentration of that leaf is, not the whole plant. So if you try to assign the biomass times that percentage, and then you calculated it back on a per acre basis, you would show like 21,000 pounds of nitrogen uptake, right? Which we all know is the furthest thing from the truth. Yeah. So the only way to truly do it with a formula would be, at least to what my brain can compute, is a whole plant analysis, treated, untreated, take the biomass, and then calculate that back out on a per acre basis. And then you would be able to truly measure uptake of treated and uptake of the untreated.
And you guys are doing this on the 365 program?
Yeah, so we do this on our research farm. You guys, he was in studio with me. I think maybe it was for the fall segment, but Mason.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kid, he was a freaking trooper. last year, 20 locations. He's walking out, and we took biomass every single time. We've got data on V4 corn all the way up to R4 corn, and so he's walking out of fields where we had research locations at carrying whole plants 10 feet, 11 feet tall. When it's 95 degrees and feels like it's 103, and we're chopping these up and we're taking biomass samples, but we feel like that's the only true way to understand what is actually going on. The easy way would just be, hey, let's take a biomass sample on a couple plants, let's take the tissue analysis, and we'll call it good. But the moment that you do that and you calculate it, you're like, well, how do I do a presentation where a grower's going to be like, so you're telling me that your treated plants are going to take up 22,000 pounds of nitrogen and the untreated plants are taking up 18,000 pounds of nitrogen. So today, that's the best way that I know how to do it.
Now I feel bad for honking it at him as he's carrying all them plants out in the.
It's good for him, and it builds character.
Yep.
Well, let's move on now into kind of the middle. Well, I shouldn't say move on because we were talking about the middle of the growing season. But another listener's question was around supply, and it hit a couple of different areas. He mentioned fungicides, post-emergence, and what your supply looks like at BW Fusion. So how are things? Are we going to be short? Do we need to be scrambling to try and grab up inventory, or what's it look like?
I'll tell you, last year sitting in some of the meetings, with the owners of BW, and they're sitting here and looking at projections for where we could be and trying to figure out how to procure and source all the raws. I'm looking at it and I'm nervous as heck. And I tend to be a little more conservative, I guess. And they're saying, well, we got to have 2x. We have to have 2x of what we did this year. And I thought, man, I've been a part of companies that have experienced really big growth. Can we really truly sustain this kind of growth year over year over year now that we've seen for 3 or 4 years? And it's crazy. It is crazy, but we're in an unbelievable position for our customers. We haven't had to tell anybody, hey, if you don't put an order in back in January, we can't guarantee that you're going to get it. If you didn't do business with us last year, we're not going to be able to take care of you this year, which I know with some of the fungicide markets has happened. They basically said, like, look, if you didn't buy Veltima or Revitech or something from us last year, we have to reserve that back for the customer that bought from us last year before we can commit to anything, because we're getting told that, we're not going to get any more Veltima than what we had, or we're actually getting cut. So from our side, we haven't experienced that. I'm very fortunate for that. It seemed crazy back at the time that we did it, but it was certainly the right thing to do for the business and for the customer, because we haven't had to take massive price increases progressively through the growing season either. We've been able to hold things fairly close. And again, a lot of that was because we were able to see, kind of ahead of what this potentially could look like.
What about on the just your knowledge of the territory? Because there is a lot of rumors circulating being short fungicides, and
For sure.
and potentially short on a year that we're going to see some big pressure. And then what about any late season chemicals too?
I tell you, I genuinely feel bad for the folks in the crop protection side. I've talked to a guy out of Northwest Iowa, and he said, Bodie, he said, I've been in the business for 12, 13 years, and he said, I've never seen anything like this. They've gotten cut significantly on some of their things. Obviously, the earlier you know about it, the more in advance that you can be and start putting, plans together with alternative, right? So, okay, we're not going to use Roundup, or, hey, maybe let's go a little heavier on a pre-emerge so we're not relying on a Liberty. The fungicide piece, I think, honestly, that's scary for a lot of people. I'll take my area, for example. We got hit really hard as you go 30 miles north into the west of me and really up to the Michigan line. here in Indiana. We got hit really, really hard with tar spot. I know you guys haven't really experienced that yet.
It's here.
Can I say yet? If that comes, I've had growers that were spraying 2-3 shots of fungicide, trying to control that. If you didn't spray, you were shelling 100 bushel irrigated corn when typically it would be 260, 270 irrigated corn. So, that piece does, I would say, is fairly concerning to a lot of folks.
We've got tar spot here, just in small amounts. Eastern Iowa has it, or has had some heavier, but Iowa State has confirmed that it is here. I saw it in some of our fields the last 2 years in my plots. You could see it came in late, right? So it didn't really affect yield. But is fungicide the best way to go about that? Or is there something can we make the plants healthier to not get that, or what can we do?
So there's, I would say we're still very early in that disease. There's a lot more questions than there are answers. But I'll say a couple of things. One, plant health, a lot like human health is that, the healthier that we are as humans, we have the ability to fight off a lot of diseases. If we have underlying health issues, maybe something that would be a runny nose to a healthy person, has us down for 4 or 5 days. The same is very true in plants. Have we isolated what key nutrients need to be the highest to try to combat it? I don't think we're there yet. I know that we got to start paying attention to the micronutrients. I think those are important. I think the more that we're going to learn, things that I've seen and things that I've really talked about for the past couple of years is let's not try to overdo or overload the nitrogen piece. If you've ever heard of taking a Brix reading, what happens is the harder you push your nitrogen, typically the lower your Brix levels are, and there's a lot of correlations to the lower your Brix readings, the unhealthier that plant is, making it susceptible to plants or to insects and disease. The higher you keep the Brix readings on those plants, the more you really kind of build up their defense system, if you will, and you really allow them to kind of fight or combat, keep some of these diseases at bay a bit.
Man, I know what Brix is because you get into the granola side of things it feels like, but I know it from the berry industry. So we will measure Brix, and it's basically the amount of sugars, right? Oh. That's in I guess you squeeze a leaf or squeeze a berry and you look through I can't remember what you call it, refractometer, and you see the Brix, and they actually will say if it's high enough in sugars, bugs don't have a stomach and they can't digest sugars, and they'll actually die if they eat the plant, so they won't eat it.
Wow.
Yeah. And insects, they have a different, I guess, wavelength, you could call it, as far as what their eyes can actually see. So one of the best things is, or one of the coolest things when you're scouting is if you see insects, that plant maybe looks normal to you, but they're telling you that plant is the weakest of the ones in that area, and that's why they attacked it, because that stands out to them. Mm-hmm. And it's because it's lower in Brix levels. The higher the Brix levels, they don't have a pancreas, so they don't have the ability to process those sugars, so they stay away from them.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, it made you sound like a nerd that you do that.
I said it gets a little granola here, but that's how it is. What's new on the biological front? Any new products?
We've got some new products that we're coming out with at Fusion. We've got a new product that's a soybean row starter. It's called SoyWorks. Awful lot of excitement for that around that product this year. HumaCal is another product that we've come out with. It's a soluble calcium with humic and fulvic in it. And a lot of these new products that folks are going to see from Fusion is really, it's really spurred because of two things. One, very fortunate to work with some high yield soybean producers that have challenged me and said, what his ideal soybean plant looks like from a tissue standpoint are these key nutrients. And if he can achieve that, then he can get this desirable structure of a soybean plant. And, we talked about auxin and we talked about cytokinin. And, if you want to dig in a little bit on that, an auxin-driven soybean plant is typically going to look like this. It's going to look like no real laterals coming off of it. It's going to have wider spaces between nodes, and it's going to grow, and it's going to be more vegetative in that. So it's going to get taller. In soybeans, energy is such a big piece to driving yield. And really, if we can keep that plant short, like the shorter we can keep that plant, the higher yields we typically have had. I like to tell this story a lot. I sprayed one time on my grandpa's field, and I didn't clean the sprayer completely out, and it had some atrazine in it that I didn't know was in it. And I kept those beans no taller than about my shin. So I don't know, 18, 24 inches. That's all the taller they were. And looking at them, my grandpa was livid. He was like, "You're going to have to pay me for those beans because you dinged them really bad." And I said, "All right, we'll weigh them versus the ones that were not." They were actually the best beans on the entire farm that we cut that year. They were this big and just loaded with pods. So really, SoyWorks is a product that was designed to build a root system that we want, and really trying to make that plant be more cytokine dominant than auxin dominant. Humical is a product that is built to go in a pre-emerge herbicide pass. Certain pre-emerge herbicide passes, we're mixing Meltdown or Biomass Plus with it. But a lot of these products that you're going to see coming from Fusion are from partnerships with high yield growers that we're fortunate to work with, or I should say, really this is year 3 now of data from Agronomy 365, and really trying to address what we've seen as some of the biggest limiting factors. And, H3A calcium, or plant available calcium, is one of the biggest things that a lot of our growers struggle with, whether it be North Carolina to North Dakota, Tennessee, up to, Tennessee to Nebraska. It really doesn't matter. Those H3A calcium levels really aren't where we would like them. So it's neat. And I'm getting my taste on product development and formulation. It's something new for me. It's exciting, but I almost feel like I'm cheating a little bit because of the data that I've been able to look at from what we've seen and what we've done here at our research plots, and utilizing 365, the soils and the tissues, to identify, hey, what are we struggling with the most, and how can we address that? How can we fix it?
Nice. Corey's over here drawing pictures. He doesn't want to make a mistake between. I can't read your handwriting.
Auxin and cytokine.
No, that's great. So before we wrap up, do you have any other general comments that you'd like to share with listeners, either to instill confidence or motivate them to try something new this year, as this episode's going to release only a week after we recorded it, basically?
Yeah, again, I think the biggest thing, to wrap up is, one, I understand the calendar's telling you that you got to go, but look at your soil, listen to your soil, let your soil really tell you, is it time to go? I understand doing things maybe, a half a day or a day in advance, but, 2 or 3 days earlier than what you should be out there isn't the recipe for, big time success. You have a lot of money as a producer. You have a lot of money in an acre of corn or soybeans, whatever crop you're going to grow this year. So how do you set yourself up for the biggest success? And then, as far as trying something, maybe it's me. But again, I said it earlier, I look at this as I only have so many years to truly learn something. And, I'm somewhat jealous of South America that they could plant 2 crops in a year. Because if I could do that, I would so do it. I feel like it would speed up my learning. I feel like that I could bring more value to the growers that I work with, because I would be able to see the mistake that I made on the first half of the year and address it and say, did the outcome perform the way that I thought it was going to? And so, if you're year 1 in your farming career or you're year 30 in your farming career, try something like, something that interests you, something that intrigues you. Find something and trial it and see, does this make a difference on my operation, or is there a future that I can see this working or being implemented into my practice?
So, Corey, what are you going to try?
I'd like to get my hand on some of that soybean starter because I don't think we planned on that.
No,
You guys didn't have that in the pipeline last fall, right? When we were ordering stuff.
No, this was one that 8 weeks ago I had to put a number down that I thought on, how many acres or how many gallons I thought we should get, and so we started to procure it, started to get it, and I'll be honest. At the time, I was feeling really good about it. I felt really, really confident, like, yeah, we'll be able to move this. And then I'm getting reports, hey, Nebraska's pretty well all planted with their beans. Iowa's starting to plant. The Dakotas are even starting to plant. And I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, we're going to have so much extra this fall. And it's been overwhelming and absolutely just fun to be a part of. But something that I thought, we were going to be potentially long on because a lot of these guys were going to be planting. Mother Nature happened to work against the farmer, but for us, if you will. So we're going to end up getting, we're going to get all of it. We brought two blenders online out in Fonda. We produced 40,000 gallons day one. Shipped that into the Dakotas. We've probably today, right now, probably shipped another or produced another 25 or 30,000 gallons. My guys here in Logansport, Indiana, I got to give them a little shout out. They're a bunch of rock stars, but they've probably produced another 25,000 gallons. So it's there, Corey. It was not talked about in the fall time. This is something that. Again, the partnership with the high yield grower, he was pretty adamant that we needed to have something like this that could influence that plant early on, because you only get to influence the structure of that soybean plant early. If you wait till V5, V6, V7, the window is already gone.
Yeah. You better, I know who you're going to call.
Yeah. Yep.
Right after this show to make sure you get some. But, Bodie, be thinking about the question we ask all of our listeners. What do you know now that you wish you'd have known sooner? While Corey kind of tries to summarize what we talked about here today during our agronomy show.
Yep. Today we had Bodie Kitchel on. We always talk to him spring and fall. Love talking to him, getting his updates, seeing what's going on with BW Fusion. Talked about where the crops were, where we're wet, where we're dry, and how spring has been pushed back. But we haven't lost potential. We're just going to shove everything into a much smaller time frame and throw the GDUs at it. We also dove way deeper into the 365 program and into the tissues and learning about the biomass samples that I didn't even know about, and I've been a year through it. So it's amazing when you pick up things each time. Talked about the summer turning off hot and dry, so watch out for that. What else? Oh, supply stuff. There's definitely some supply issues on some products, so be cognizant of that. Hopefully you got that in the shed. And then new products that's going on at BW Fusion. So specifically this new, we got Humical, and then what was it? SoyWorks or SoilWorks?
SoyWorks.
SoyWorks. And I'm pretty excited about that. And then I sketched a beautiful drawing here that I'll auction off between the difference between auxin and cytokine-based soybean plants. So that's what I got.
Awesome. So what do you know now, Bodie, that you wish you'd have known sooner?
Man, it is a great question. And honestly, I have a grower that he asked me that same question that we started working with. And he phrased it a different way. He said, he goes, each year you probably learn just a little bit, right? And I told him, I said, honestly, I feel like I know 100% more today than I did last year at the same exact time. And that's my passion. Like, my passion is to never stop where I'm at today. The pursuit of always trying to learn, just trying to bring information to these growers. So I don't know, I think there's a part of you that would say everything, right? You wish you knew everything that you know today earlier. But I think if you knew everything that you know today, would it make you a little more complacent? Would you be a little bit lazier? You wouldn't have that drive inside you. And so I don't know that there's anything that I could point to specifically that says, I wish today that I knew this 2 years ago. What I can say is I'm extremely excited for what I'm going to learn this next growing season.
Yeah. You're probably going to end up almost disappearing off the map here for a little bit once these crops start to come out. I know how many miles you put on being out in the field yourself, and that's kind of a fun thing about this partnership with BW Fusion is that you guys your boots on the ground, plus you have the technology and the results to back what you're putting together. So remember, listeners, if you want to check out their products, it's bw-fusion.com, and you mentioned Farm for Profit. Try and wiggle whatever you can out of those guys. The promotion we've got for you is if you sign up 500 acres, you'll get a free field in the 365 program. But I know if you twist Bodie's arm a little bit, maybe he can get you access to some of these products for being a Farm for Profit listener.
Do you want a challenge?
Let's challenge him.
All right. I have one kind of off topic, but it's going to be on topic when it comes to when we're going for farming. And it's a term that came to my mind yesterday, normalization of deviance. Have you ever heard that?
No, it sounds scientific.
Some psychology or sociology class I had, and it's the process in which you do improper behavior every time and it becomes normal. So you didn't wear your safety belt, but we didn't get in a car accident, so it's kind of normal. And then the next time we didn't wear it, and then we didn't get hurt, and the next time we didn't wear it, to where it becomes now normal in government or in corporate culture, or it becomes normal in your day-to-day life. So I'm sure there's a whole other podcast out there that we could do on what have you done wrong on your farm and how you got hurt or something like that. So as everybody goes into the field, don't normalize deviance. If there's a safety feature, use it. If it's put there for a reason, somebody got hurt one time, just because you didn't get hurt doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
Planting conditions. Yeah, don't cut corners. I know Corey's going to plant around ponds this spring. Probably. So don't
drive through the
Correct.
pond. Then you just got to dig it out.
Just because it worked one time doesn't mean
distance.
Yeah.
If you're going to do it, make sure you're filming a TikTok.
Yeah. I'm glad you like that challenge, Dave. I mean, I actually started doing that a couple years ago. I never used to wear my seatbelt in the tractor.
Yep.
Right? You always feel safe in a tractor, but going down the road 26 mile an hour with a full planter behind you or in a sprayer that goes 33, a lot of things can go wrong pretty quick. So I think probably about the time I had kids, I started thinking about that.
There you go. Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Bodie, thanks again. If somebody wants to find you on Twitter, remind us what your handle is.
BKitch1Bodie.
BKitch1Bodie. Go out there and find him. Of course, BW-Fusion. But we thank you again. We'll catch up with you probably mid-season and find out how these crops are growing. Until next time, though, listeners, have a good one.
Thanks, guys.
Remember, if you aren't farming for profit, you won't be farming for long.